He rotted alive in a locked cell. His skin blackened. His hair fell in clumps. His teeth crumbled from his mouth. And the key to that prison was held by his own father, the King of Spain. Why would the most powerful monarch in the world imprison his only son? What twisted secret made Prince Carlos so feared, so dangerous, that his father would rather see him die in chains than sit on the throne? Stay with me, because this is not just the story of a prince. This is one of history's darkest royal secrets, where bloodlines, madness, and betrayal ended in horror. In 1545, the bells of Spain rang with joy. A prince had been born. Don Carlos, the long-awaited heir of the mighty Habsburg dynasty, entered the world in splendor. But beneath the celebration, something was already wrong. The infant's skull was misshapen, his body frail, his cries weak. Courtiers whispered that the child seemed more ghost than boy. And yet he was the only son of King Philip II. The empire, stretching from Spain to the Americas, placed its hopes in this fragile infant. But Carlos carried not just the weight of the crown. He carried the curse of his bloodline. The Habsburgs had intermarried for generations, folding their family tree onto itself until the branches tangled. While most children had 16 great-great-grandparents, Carlos had only 6. Too much royal blood, and not enough fresh life. The result was a legacy of deformities, madness, and disease, all etched into the body of the boy who would be king. His health was so poor that desperate physicians tried brutal cures. They shaved his head. They cut into his skull. They drilled holes straight into his bone, hoping to relieve pressure and heal the deformities. The treatment left him scarred but not saved. His body remained weak, his head grotesquely large, his frame delicate. And still, the kingdom cheered. The banners waved. No one dared admit the truth, that Spain's future was hanging by a single fragile thread. Because if Carlos's body was cursed, his mind would prove to be far more dangerous. As Carlos grew older, the cracks in his mind became impossible to hide. At first it was whispered as childish mischief, but soon it became cruelty. He beat his servants until they bled. He tortured animals for amusement, boiling them alive. Peasants who crossed his path became his prey, hunted for sport as if they were nothing more than game. His laughter, they said, was cold and hollow, the sound of a boy who enjoyed the suffering of others, but then, just as suddenly, he would collapse into weakness. He fainted often, his body unable to sustain him. Within hours he could shift from trembling and pale to red-eyed fury, raging at anyone who dared to approach. His moods were storms, wild, unpredictable, and terrifying. Priests began to whisper what others feared to say aloud. Was this madness? A curse from God? Or even possession by something darker? To a deeply Catholic Spain, such questions were dangerous, and yet impossible to silence. Foreign ambassadors wrote in secret letters, "The prince is not fit to rule." They described a young man of broken health and broken mind, unsteady, uncontrollable, and unworthy of the empire waiting for him. But no one dared say it openly. He was still the heir. He was still the prince who carried Spain's crown. And yet, his instability grew more alarming with each year. His rage, his cruelty, his unpredictability, they were building towards something, because when love entered his life, Don Carlos's fragile mind would finally shatter. For a brief moment, it seemed as though fate might finally show mercy to Don Carlos. In 1559, after years of being whispered about as cursed, sickly, and unstable, a light entered his life. That light was Elizabeth of Valois, a young French princess, whose marriage was meant to seal peace between Spain and France after decades of bloody wars. For Spain, her betrothal to Carlos was more than politics, and it was hope, a chance to heal wounds, unite kingdoms, and give the troubled prince purpose. To the people of Spain, Carlos would finally have a bride. To Carlos himself, it was much more. Elizabeth was not just a political union. She was his salvation, a promise that maybe, just maybe, love could quiet the storms in his body and mind. But fate is rarely kind in royal courts. The arrangement was broken. Carlos would not marry Elizabeth. Instead, his father, King Philip II, decided that he himself would take the young princess as his bride. Elizabeth, only 14 years old, suddenly became not Carlos's bride, but his stepmother. The woman who had been promised to him, the Aya woman he dreamed might soften his cursed life, now belonged to his father. For Don Carlos, this was not just betrayal, it was humiliation. A wound deeper than any physical illness he had endured. The fragile boy became a restless, tormented man. From that moment on, Carlos's behavior spiraled. He could not let Elizabeth go. He followed her in palace corridors, staring at her with a desperate, unsettling intensity. At court ceremonies, his eyes locked onto her with such obsession that foreign ambassadors began to whisper. Servants reported he lingered outside her chambers, that he tried to force conversations, that he begged her for attention she could not and dared not give. What made the obsession even darker was the twisted irony. She was both his stepmother and the lost bride of his youth. Forbidden, unreachable, but forever desired. This heartbreak festered in his unstable mind like poison. His words turned bitter, venomous. He accused his father of betrayal, of theft, of stealing not only a woman but his very destiny. Elizabeth had been his key to legitimacy, to a life beyond weakness and ridicule, and Philip had ripped it from him. Court rumors spread rapidly. Carlos muttered to himself in dark corners. He scribbled secret notes about revenge, about conspiracies against his father. He accused those closest to him of treachery, lashing out at allies and enemies alike. The Spanish court had once pitied him as a sickly, broken child. But now pity gave way to fear. Ambassadors wrote back to their kings, "The prince is unstable. He cannot be trusted with the crown." Even those loyal to him began to worry. For Carlos's heartbreak was no longer just. By now, whispers about Don Carlos had grown too loud to ignore. They no longer lingered only in the marble corridors of Madrid. They spread through taverns, foreign embassies, even across borders. Everywhere the question was the same. Could the heir to the greatest empire on earth truly be a madman? Reports reached Rome, Paris, and London. Courtiers murmured of the prince's rages, of his obsessions, of his reckless cruelty. Diplomats scribbled warnings in coded letters. The prince is unstable. Spain's future may be doomed. Spies exaggerated, twisted, embellished. But behind the rumors, one truth remained. Don Carlos had become a danger not just to himself, but to the crown itself. Some claimed he was planning an escape, that he meant to flee the Spanish court and ride north, where the rebellious provinces of the Netherlands were rising against his father's rule. There he would crown himself the champion of revolt, a prince at war with his own king. Others whispered of even darker ambitions. That Carlos had sworn to kill his father, that he muttered of plunging a dagger into Philip II's chest, that he dreamed not of ruling with his father's blessing, but of seizing the crown with his father's blood. Were these wild exaggerations? Perhaps. Were they the ravings of courtiers eager to discredit him? Maybe. But to King Philip none of that mattered. The whispers alone were poison, and poison left untreated spreads quickly. Philip II was not just a father. He was the ruler of the most powerful empire the world had ever seen, stretching from Spain to the Americas, from Italy to the Philippines. He could not risk rebellion. He could not risk scandal. And above all, he could not risk a mad prince inheriting his throne. And so the king made his choice. Cold, calculated, absolute. The throne must survive. Even if the heir did not, it was the dead of night when the order came down. The palace slept under heavy silence, but silence was broken by the clatter of boots, the metallic echo of armor against stone. Soldiers, chosen for their loyalty, marched through the halls with torches flickering against the gilded walls. They stopped outside the chambers of Don Carlos. Inside, the young prince slept fitfully, plagued as always by fevered dreams and restless thoughts. He did not know that his life as heir was already over. The doors burst open. Steel flashed. Voices barked commands. Carlos leapt up in terror and rage, shouting, struggling, clawing at the men who swarmed around him. He fought like a trapped animal, his screams echoing through the... Don Carlos's death did not end with the closing of his tomb. Across Europe, whispers spread like wildfire. He became a cautionary tale, the perfect symbol of what happens when royal bloodlines fold in on themselves. When dynasties sacrifice health for power, and when heirs are broken before they ever wear the crown. In Spain, his name was silenced. Official records reduced him to a tragic footnote. But in the courts of France, Italy, and beyond, his story grew darker. Retold as a warning, beware the children of power, for behind every golden crown may hide a curse, and yet not all of Carlos remains buried. To this day, rumors haunt the Escorial Palace, the massive stone mausoleum where he spent his final months. Visitors claim that when the halls fall silent, they can hear distant screams, the restless cries of a prince who rotted alive in his father's prison. His shadow lingers in whispers, his ghost woven into the stone itself. But perhaps the most haunting question of all is not about ghosts. It is about truth. Was Don Carlos truly a monster, born twisted by blood and madness? Or was he a broken child, crushed under the weight of royal ambition, betrayed by the very father who should have protected him? In the end, Carlos's story reminds us of one chilling reality. Even princes rot. Even crowns cannot protect from decay, so tell me, what do you believe? Was Carlos the victim of his cursed birth, or the victim of his father's ruthless politics? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story left you shaken, give this video a like. It helps us bring more of history's darkest secrets to light. Don't forget to subscribe, because in this channel the past is never dead, and history's darkest truths are always stranger than fiction.